Hey there, Barkley Bookers. So you might have noticed, or you might not have, but maybe you did, from the picture that the book I'm going to read you next is American Tall Tale. This is an American story called John Henry, and it's retold by Julius Lester, but it's been around a long time. The pictures are by Jerry Pinkney, who's an amazing illustrator, and I usually don't mention the illustrator, which I really should because the illustrators are just as important as the authors, but I mention it specifically for this one because this book won a Caldecott honor, and you could see it if you were really paying attention behind the barcode. See that silver medal? My first graders, when you get to second grade next year, you'll learn all about the Caldecott medal. My second graders, you learned about it this year, and this book, John Henry, was one of the ones I had on display. So this is an American Tall Tale. Now, American Tall Tales, or tall tales in general, have, there's some truth to them, but they've been told and retold and retold so many times that they've been blown out to this wild story, this unbelievable story that has elements in it that really can't possibly be true. So I forget if it was last week or the week before, but I read you the story of Paul Bunyan, and he had the blue ox, and they were giant-sized, and Paul created the Grand Canyon with his axe, and now we know Paul did not create the Grand Canyon with his axe. That was made by, right, the Rio, the river flowing through it, and it gradually got lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and cut through the Grand Canyon more and more as time went on, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. But this story, John Henry, is an old story. It's been around since about the early 1900s, I want to say. The only thing that we really know is that in about the 1870s, a railroad was built through the Allegheny Mountains, which is kind of near here, over on our side. And the local people started singing a song about John Henry. So there probably was a John Henry, but probably this legend of John Henry did not happen exactly as it does in the story. See if you can figure out why while we read it. So this is the American culture, the American tale, tall tale of John Henry. Ooh, got stuck to me. You've probably never heard of John Henry, or maybe you heard about him, but you don't know the ins and outs of his comings and goings. Well, that's why I'm going to tell you about him. When John Henry was born, birds came from everywhere to see him. The bears and panthers and moose and deer and rabbits and squirrels and even a unicorn came out of the woods to see him. And instead of the sun tending to its business and going to bed, it was peeping out from behind the moon's skirts trying to get a glimpse of the new baby. The unicorn coming out of the forest to see John Henry. Did you sniff something out already that really couldn't quite possibly be true? Before long, the mama and papa came out on the porch to show off their brand new baby. The birds oohed, and the animals ahed at how handsome the baby was. Somewhere in the middle of one of the oohs, or maybe it was on the backside of one of the ahs, that baby jumped out of that mama's arms and started growing. He grew and he grew and he grew and he grew until his head and shoulders busted through the roof, which was over the porch. John Henry thought that was the funniest thing in the world, and he laughed so loud the sun got scared. It scurried out from behind the moon's skirts and it went to bed, which is where it should have been all the while. So there's John Henry, and he's growing and growing and growing. And it all happened at once. The next morning, John Henry was up at sunrise. The sun wasn't. He was tired, and he decided to sleep in. John Henry wasn't going to have none of that. He hollered up into the sky, "Get up from there! I got things to do, and I need light to do them by." The sun yawned, washed its face, and flossed and brushed its teeth, and hurried up over the horizon. That day, John Henry helped his papa rebuild the porch he had busted through. Added a wing onto the house with an indoor swimming pool and one of them jacuzzis. After lunch, he chopped down an acre of trees and he split them into fireplace logs, and he still had time for a nap before supper. Now remember, Barkley Brookers, he was just born the day before. So those of you who have little baby brothers and baby sisters and little cousins and things like that, would they be building a house and chopping up logs the day after they were born? But that's what he looked like the day after he was born. The next day, John Henry went to town. He met up with the meanest man in the state, Ferret-Faced Freddy, sitting on his big white horse. You know what he was doing? He was thinking of mean things to do. Ferret-Faced Freddy was so mean, he cried if he had a nice thought. John Henry said, "Freddy, I'll make you a bet. Let's have a race. You on your horse and me on my legs. If you and your horse win, you can work me as hard as you want for a whole year. But if I win, you have to be nice for a whole year." Ferret-Faced Freddy laughed an evil laugh. "Ha, ha, ha! It's a deal, John Henry." His voice sounded like bat wings on tombstones. There's Ferret-Faced Freddy on his big white horse, making that deal with John Henry. The next morning, folks lined up all along the way to see which way the race would go. John Henry was ready. Ferret-Faced Freddy and his horse were ready. Bang! The race was on. The great-granddaddy's brother's cousin, sister-in-law's uncle's aunt was there that morning. She said everybody saw Ferret-Faced Freddy ride by on his big white horse, and they were sure enough moving. Didn't nobody see John Henry. That's because he was so fast, the wind was out of breath trying to keep up with him. When Ferret-Faced Freddy crossed that finish line, John Henry was already on the other side, sitting in a rocking chair and drinking a soda mom. After that, Ferret-Faced Freddy was so nice, everybody called him Frederick the Friendly. There's that race happening. There he is, sitting down, drinking a soda mom, not a soda pop, soda mom. John Henry decided it was time for him to go on down the big road. He went home and told his mama and daddy goodbye. His daddy said, "You got to have something to make your way in the world with, son. These belong to your granddaddy." And he gave him 2 20-pound sledgehammers with 4-foot handles made of whalebone. A day or so later, John Henry saw a crew building a road. At least that's what they were doing until they came on a boulder right smack dab where the road was supposed to go. This was no ordinary boulder. It was as hard as anger and so big around it took a half a week for a tall man to walk from one side to the other. Boulder. Looks like it has a face, doesn't it? John Henry offered to lend them a hand. "That's all right. We'll put some dynamite to it." John Henry smiled to himself. "Whatever you say." The road crew planted dynamite all around the rock and set it off. Kerboom! Blamity, blamity, boom, boom, bang, boom, bang! That dynamite made so much racket, the Almighty looked over the parapets of heaven and hollered, "It's getting too noisy down there!" The dynamite kicked up so much dirt and dust it got dark. The moon thought night had caught her napping, and she hurried out so fast she almost bumped into the sun, who was still climbing the steep hill toward noontime. When all the commotion from the dynamite was over, the road crew was amazed. The boulder was still there. In fact, the dynamite hadn't knocked even a chip off of it. The crew didn't know what to do. Then they heard a rumbling noise. They looked around. It was John Henry laughing. He said, "If you gentlemen would give me a little room, I got some work to do." "Don't see how you could do what that dynamite couldn't," said the boss of the crew. John Henry chuckled. "Just watch me." He swung one of his hammers round and round his head, and it made such a wind the leaves blew off the trees and the birds fell out of the sky. Ring! The hammer hit the boulder. The boulder shivered like you do on a cold winter morning when it looks like the school bus is never going to come. Ring! The boulder shivered like the morning when freedom came to the slaves. John Henry picked up his other hammer. He swung one hammer in a circle over his head. As soon as it hit the rock, ring! The hammer in his left hand started to make a circle and ring! Soon the ring of one hammer followed the ring of another one so closely it sounded like they were falling at the same time. Ring, 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 ring! Chips and dust were flying from the boulders so fast that John Henry vanished from sight, but you could still hear his hammers. Ring, ring! The air seemed to dance to the rhythm of his hammers. The boss of the road crew looked up. His mouth dropped open. He pointed into the sky, and there in the air above the boulder was a rainbow. John Henry was swinging the hammer so fast he was making a rainbow around his shoulders. It was shining and shimmering in the dust and grit like a hope that never dies. John Henry started singing, I got a rainbow, ring, ring, tied around my shoulder, ring, ring. It ain't gonna rain, no it ain't gonna rain, ring, ring. There's that rainbow up there. There's all the men standing around watching him. John Henry sang and he hammered and the air danced and the rainbow shimmered and the earth shook and rolled from the blows of the hammer, and finally it was quiet. Slowly the dust cleared. Folks could not believe their eyes. The boulder was gone. In its place was the prettiest and straightest road they had ever seen. Not only had John Henry pulverized the boulder into pebbles, he had finished building the road. In the distance, where the new road connected to the main one, the road crew saw John Henry waving goodbye, a hammer on each shoulder, the rainbow draped around him like love. You can see the rainbow right here. John Henry went on his way. He had heard that any man good with a hammer could find work building the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad through West Virginia. That was where he had been going when he stopped to build the road. The next day, John Henry arrived at the railroad. However, work had stopped. The railroad tracks had to go through a mountain, and such a mountain. Next to it, even John Henry felt small. But a worker told John Henry about a new machine they were going to use to tunnel through the mountain. It was called a steam drill. It can hammer faster and harder than 10 men, and it never has to stop to rest. The next day, the boss arrived with that steam drill. John Henry said to him, let's have a contest. Your steam drill against me and my hammers. The man laughed. I heard you're the best there ever was, John Henry, but even you can't out-hammer a machine. Let's find out, John Henry answered. The boss shrugged. Don't make me no never mind. You start on the other side of the mountain, I'll start on the steam drill over here. Whoever gets to the middle first is the winner. The next morning, all was still. The birds weren't singing and the roosters weren't crowing. When the son didn't hear the rooster, he wondered if something was wrong, and so he rose a couple of minutes early just to see. What he saw was a mountain as big as hurt feelings. On one side was a big machine hooked up to hoses. It was belching smoke and steam. As the machine attacked the mountain, rocks and dirt and underbrush flew into the air. On the other side was John Henry. Next to the mountain, he didn't look much bigger than a wish that wasn't ever going to come true. He had a 20-pound hammer in each hand and muscles hard as wisdom in each arm. As he swung them through the air, they shone like silver, and when the hammers hit the rock, they rang like gold. Before long, tongues of fire leapt out with each blow. Do you friends hear all the mnemonic devices, all the literary devices used in this story? We got simile, we got metaphor, we got all kinds of things going on. Onomatopoeia, say that word. Isn't that a fun word? Those are sound words. Crash, bang, ring. There they are. One on each side. There's John Henry. Steam drills on the other side. Hammering through that mountain as big as hurt feelings. On the other side, the boss of the steam drill felt the mountain shudder. He got scared and hollered, I believe the mountain is caving in. From the darkness inside the mountain came a deep voice. It's just my hammer sucking wind. Just my hammer sucking wind. There wasn't enough room inside the tunnel for the rainbow, so it wrapped itself around the mountain on the side where John Henry was. All through the night, John Henry and the steam drill went at it. In the light from the tongues of the fire shooting out of the tunnel from John Henry's hammer blows, folks could see the rainbow wrapped around the mountain like a shawl. The sun came up extra early the next morning to see who was winning. Just as it did, John Henry broke through and met the steam drill. The boss of the steam drill was flabbergasted. John Henry had come 1.25 miles. The steam drill had only come 1/4. It's coming out to meet that steam drill. Folks were cheering and yelling, "John Henry! John Henry!" John Henry walked out of the tunnel and into the sunlight. He raised his arms over his head, a hammer in each hand. The rainbow slid off the mountain and around his shoulders. With a smile, John Henry's eyes closed, and slowly he fell to the ground. John Henry was dead. He had hammered so hard and so fast and so long that his big heart had burst. Everybody was silent for a minute, and then came the sound of soft crying. Some said it came from the moon. Another one said she saw the sun shed a tear. And then something strange happened. Afterwards, folks swore the rainbow whispered it. I don't know, but whether it was a whisper or a thought, everyone had the same knowing at the same moment. Dying ain't important. Everybody does that. What matters is how well you do your living. First one person started clapping, and then another, and soon everybody was clapping. The next morning, the sun got everybody up early to say goodbye to John Henry. They put him on a flatbed rail car, and the train made its way slowly out of the mountains. All along the way, folks lined both sides of the track, and they were cheering and shouting through their tears. John Henry! John Henry! John Henry's body was taken to Washington, D.C. The train. Some say he was buried in the White House lawn late one night while the president and the Mrs. President was asleep. I don't know about none of that. What I do know is this. If you walk by the White House late at night, stand real still and listen real closely. Folks say you just might hear a deep voice singing, I got a rainbow ring, ring, tied around my shoulder, ring, ring, and it ain't gonna rain, no it ain't gonna rain. Ring, ring. And that is the American Tall Tale of John Henry.